Absolutely no doubt that these incredible ladies on stage with me will have plenty more to say over the course of the next 35 minutes or so. One of the things that has struck me most about the forum is just the sheer plurality of voices we've heard from academics, innovators, investors, inventors, public policy makers. I could go on, provocateurs. I'm still reeling from the protopian provocation of the Planet City from this morning, for example. But one of the things that I think we would all love to hear more from is the private sector, and, if I can borrow Patrick's phrase, the implementation of that practical utopia that could be our future. And who better to do that than three absolutely brilliant veterans, and I say that in the most aesthetically pleasing and crucially female sense of the phrase, three women at the absolute apex of their professional careers in corporate foresight. They have so much to say for themselves that I'm just going to super briefly introduce them all to get us started. Melanie, I'm sure everyone knows, is at the helm alongside Meabh Webb of the formidable Future Today Institute, custodians of some of the biggest questions that you as professionals and governments have out there in foresight. Caroline Darbon is head of prospective, another way to say foresight in French. Caroline doesn't look after just one company or one giant group at L'Oréal. That sits across 4 divisions. There are 34 international brands alone, so she's a busy lady. And if I can briefly introduce Jen also, I think Jen has the snappiest, coolest title of all of us, and that's not just because I'm a cheap sucker for alliteration. She is Chief Futurist Ford.
Yeah.
So, with that introduction, let's get started. One of the questions that I think we all wonder about is, are we doing the right thing? Are we doing enough? I've spent the last 20 years of my career in foresight, and one of the things that I'm constantly asking myself is, are we doing enough? Are we having the kind of influence that we want? Are we making the impact that we should? So that's my first question for our panel this afternoon. Melanie, let me come to you for starters.
I don't think we're ever doing enough. My background is in corporate. I spent a lot of time inside of a very large company standing up a foresight capability, and the way that I have found to have the most impact is to make sure that the foresight practice is aligned with the right area, and in my opinion, that is strategy. Most foresight is aligned, from what I have seen, into an insights function or a marketing function, and I came from insights. No shade on insights. But foresight should really inform strategy. It should inform the long-term visioning of a company. And so I think we're never quite doing enough. We can always do a little more. And part of the way that we can do that is making sure that we're aligned with the right part of the organization.
Caroline, would you like to share an example of impact at L'Oréal?
Yes, I would say that at L'Oréal it's quite nascent, although actually the long-term planning has started quite some time ago with the sustainability journey that L'Oréal has taken, I would say back in 2014. But the foresight, practice has been, I launched it like 1 year ago. Because now I have the pleasure and honor to report to the CEO of the company. So I think that it made me think totally differently the role. Because before, I've been leading this position of prospective for quite some years, 8 years now. But before it was really about product trends, beauty trends, and helping all the brands, looking at the right innovation, be sure that we are pushing them enough. And now for 1 year, I decided to move and with my whole team towards strategic foresight. And because 5 years ago I did on my own with an external agency and somebody in the organization a piece of work about 2030. It was like 12 years before. It was in 2018, and actually it had a big impact in the organization, I must say. And a lot of task force have been created, so it had a lot of impact. We saw a lot of transversal functions also trying to launch their 2030 vision. So I could say that it had an impact, but it was like a one piece of work, of foresight. But now, this is my daily job, you know, to do foresight. This is how the journey has started, and now, so I can say that it's still nascent. So much to do now. Yeah, still.
Early days, but
Yeah.
still so impressive. One of the phrases that I heard being used on a panel yesterday was that instead of just doing foresight, we should be being foresight. That made me think about the kind of transferable skills that we bring as foresight practitioners. Jen, I know you didn't start your career in foresight. Tell us a little bit more about where you started and why that helps you do what you do today.
Sure. Yeah, so I started my career. I have been at Ford for 21 years, which is my whole career. And I actually started in engineering. So I went to school for engineering, and early days was working on our in-vehicle technology. In early days, I would joke, people used to bring navigation systems to their cars in bags. We don't do that anymore. Maybe some people still do. But it was at a time when we were transitioning that and moving all of that technology into the vehicle, and I got to be on the forefront of that and figuring out how to make it work and how to help people figure out how to use it. So I took that knowledge and spent almost 10 years in engineering, and then I had the opportunity to move over to marketing and start to understand how do we communicate this technology to customers? How do we connect with consumers in a way that they can understand it and they're not intimidated by it and those types of things? And then following that, I had the opportunity to move out to Silicon Valley as we were setting up a larger presence in the Valley and learn about, I was leading up a team of user experience researchers, and following that, I did innovation work out there looking at autonomous vehicles. So often staying very close to new technologies, and especially being in Silicon Valley, getting to see kind of the future being built, quite frankly. And then our chief futurist, who had been in the role for probably 15 or 16 years at the time, I had the opportunity to build a team, and she tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I might be interested. And I said, wow, I always thought you had the coolest job at the company, but I have no idea how you do what you do. And she laughed and said, don't worry about it, nobody does, I'll teach you. And so that was the beginning, and as I look back, now that I have the role, and she's since retired, I realized a lot of my early positions at the company really did set me up nicely to already be kind of thinking about how does the future look different. Of course, in the automotive industry, we are building vehicles and planning them 5 years ahead. So in some ways, we're always looking to the future. And my ability to understand how different parts of the company work and how kind of ideas get seeded and brought to fruition have been very helpful. Now that I'm in this role and I'm trying to communicate it across different organizations at the company, figuring out what's going to connect with a different organization, for example, is one of those skills that has been really transferable and helpful.
Yeah, I think translation is such an important part of the job. I'm so pleased that I'm a professional in foresight. I had the foresight to bring cough sweets on stage with me this afternoon, as I nearly choked to death in front of you all. Melanie, let me ask you this. Who should be the number one customer of foresight in an organization?
It's hard to say number one because my perspective is that it really needs to be kind of top down and bottom up. If you aim for only one target customer within an organization, it's going to lose its meaning on the way down or the way up throughout the organization. The best success that I have seen is when the C-suite or the leadership of the organization is bought in at a level that's appropriate for them, informing their day-to-day decision-making, and then also foresight is informing the day-to-day execution of the business, answering maybe the 3 to 5 year questions or the 1 to 3 year questions. And so I won't quite give you a direct answer, but I think the number one customer is the right set of stakeholders that represent a swath of leadership across the organization.
Jen, I know it's different for you. You're talking to a different set of stakeholders. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I love this question in terms of who's the right person to work with, and I completely echo what I'm hearing from you, Melanie, in terms of needing kind of the right people to buy in. What I find is my sweet spot in terms of really getting great engagement is at kind of middle management and down, because those are the people who have the time to really invest in deep strategic foresight. And so if we, for example, we might run a workshop around the future of fill in the blank, the future of X. And what we need is engagement from teams. What I always say is it's our job to pay attention to everything happening outside of the automotive industry and figure out whether or not we need to care about it. But I need them to show up and bring their knowledge of their customer, of their battery technology, of whatever their topic is into the conversation so that we can basically work together to figure out how to make sure that we are planning strategically for the future. And then when it comes to kind of the executive level, what we need from them is their buy-in, their acceptance, and their support to let their team take that time to really get into it. Because the truth is, if without a strong cooperation where they're bringing their internal knowledge into our awareness of what we see happening around the world, then they're going to get kind of surface level insights from us. We really need them to bring that in to make sure that we're able to land it in a way that's going to be most impactful for their business.
Yeah, I've heard some of the other panels talk about that permission to do and be
correct.
in foresight. It's so important.
And it's not a 30-minute meeting.
Yeah, and I must say that at L'Oréal, I met one leader who actually created some space for future in her team. So she decided to have her team spend like 10 to 15% of the time and also dedicate some budget on foresight and thinking about innovations for the future, etc. So, but it's quite it's still rare, but it's present.
Yeah, I mean, how refreshing is that? I was struck by, well, all of the predictions, but especially the prediction from His Excellency yesterday around the fact that in 2025 we'll have our first AI board member next year. And maybe that would be better than the real thing, since I think sometimes the door to the C-suite for foresight is all too often shut. But Caroline, let me come back to you on that, because as you mentioned, you report directly into the CEO. I think this is pretty unusual for a foresight practice. Tell us about what that has brought to the company and to your role in particular.
It's true that I think the work I did back in 2018 about 2030 really brought the importance of looking forward. So again, a lot of task forces have been initiated, transversal task forces, but also R&I and innovation task forces. And I think that the CEO was not CEO at that time, but he really, I think, realized the importance of looking forward and put this vision of the future into strategy. So that's why I'm very lucky, because he's a good promoter of what we do. And he really encourages me to meet with the COMEX, I would say 3 to 4 times a year, and describe what we are doing, and also give a vision of the future and engage them in workshops of transformation. And based on that, after the vision, for example, we worked lately on the future of travel retail. And of course, it has been created and framed with the boss, with the VP of travel retail. But after, we managed to organize some workshops with the Mancom of the VP, and also it created a new vision for the travel retail for the company. And it's really bringing from a vision to an action, and this is really how it's going to. To try to transform the company. Otherwise, doing reports, inspiring reports, for me, it doesn't mean it's not very useful. And this is what they are asking from me, to have a big business impact. And this is what we are trying to do.
I mean, that's impressive to have created that level of pull. I think so often in foresight we are pushing intelligence and activation out. If we look at the flip side of that coin, another phrase this is my magpie moment again, just love the implication of yesterday. Dr. Jordan said it is the trough of disillusionment. I'm sure we've all faced the trough of disillusionment as foresight practitioners at one point or another. So I wanted to ask you about that. How do you take other people on the journey when they are naysayers, when they're not bought in, when they don't see the point of it? Jen, let me come to you on that.
Yeah, the naysayers. So the first thing I do is I listen to them, right? I want to hear what their hang up is and understand where they're coming from. And the truth is, we usually have an answer. We usually have something that can help convince them. So it's kind of being on the ready to have that discussion, but understanding where they're coming from so that you can bring them along, because the truth is, if they're not bought in, they might as well just leave the conversation. It's not necessarily going to be beneficial. Another thing that I'll try to do is understanding what group we're working with. At a company that has such a strong engineering presence, I know that if I'm working with an engineering team, they kind of want proof that I know what I'm talking about. How can I help them to buy in early so that it doesn't become this conversation of having to convince them to come along when I really need them to be there? So often it's understanding, they likely want to hear, how did I come to these conclusions? Why should they believe what I have to say? Can I show them stuff that we've done in the past? Can I show them data that help them understand how I got there? Versus if I'm working maybe with a design team, they want to be inspired. They're less concerned about some of that data. Don't bore them with the numbers. Show them the pretty pictures. Tell them the story. Give them that visceral experience. So some of it is understanding your audience, but the first thing you have to do is listen to the naysayers and figure out what it's going to take to get them over the line.
So not that we would ever subject ourselves or anybody else to stereotypes. I love that. Sometimes it's just about the pretty pictures. Melanie, you've lived both sides of the coin, from working in the private sector all the way over to agency side. You must have seen 1,000 different flavors of foresight and the impact that it's had. How have you brought some of the more challenging aspects of that to bear and turn it around?
Yeah. Naysayers and skeptics, in my experience, are almost always overwhelmed and overburdened, or they're scared. And many people in this room can probably think of a time that you were a skeptic about something. Maybe it was a new initiative, it was a new product, a new assignment that you were given. And usually that comes from a place of either I'm not familiar with this thing that I'm being asked to do, which is very true of foresight for most people, it's new, or I have so many other things on my plate, I don't have time to figure this out. And I think the most dangerous thing about this is the impact that it has around them. I can think of a handful of clients that I've worked with very recently or currently where the person that was kind of the executive sponsor was all in, very excited about the initiative we were working on, believed in the effort, believed in the power of foresight. But when it came down to taking the next step, to putting it into action, and they began to bring in their teams and other leaders to start to execute, those leaders responded with skepticism and very slowly dragged the hope of the senior leader down with them. And so the challenges there are to be able to maintain the hope or the optimism of the leader that you're working with, and also to be able to address the skepticism that you're being met with. And for me, the most powerful way to do that is to create psychological safety. When you're having a dialogue with that business partner, that stakeholder who is clearly uncomfortable, clearly feeling skeptical, you have to truly meet them in a place of understanding. It's not good enough to fake it. We as foresight practitioners have to be able to meet them in that place and say that we understand the other commitments they have on their plate. We understand that this is a very new practice, and we're here to help them succeed. And I've worked with a variety of organizations where they just culturally lacked psychological safety, and that's a really challenging thing to overcome. But that, to me, really is the key.
One of the things I'm always interested in is despite the sort of technical and professional practice that we're in the end, it's all about, human motivation. And I'm always struck with whether we do things in foresight and we're motivated to do those things through either fear, or shall we say FOMO, or greed. on Monday night, coming back from the speaker dinner, I was talking to Marcus. Hi, Marcus, if you're out there. Marcus set up the Future Lab at UBS, but he was asked and invited to do this by the board of the company after the $60 billion hole that was left in the 2008 financial crisis. So clearly, that moment of fear propelled the business to do things drastically differently and set up a whole new initiative. So I'm keen to get this from each of you. What has worked best? Does this speak to you in any way? Caroline, let me come to you first.
Yes, I think for L'Oréal there is always an appetite for innovation. This is really what drives the business. So I would say that greed is very important. Greed is very important, and the first piece of work on Foresight brought a lot of opportunities. And I think it also gave a vision that nobody would have before, because we were looking often at the same regular competitors. And it brought in new competitors, new visions that was very interesting and intriguing for all the leaders. So I would say greed. I would say not fear, but which is also very important in our culture, is the healthy concern. We have everybody's healthily concerned, I would say, and we always ask ourselves, are we going far enough? Is it interesting enough? What if there is something that could happen, and this and that? So I think this is really how we push things. And fear, no, because fear is very paralyzing, I would say. So that's why, again, we always push this healthy concern.
Jen, how does it show up at Ford in that way?
So it does show up, and I'm going to take kind of the easy answer out and say I don't pick one or the other. I lean into both.
Okay.
Because in a lot of ways, it goes back to what I was saying before about connecting with your audience and figuring out what's going to move them to action.
Sure.
And so for some, you've got to scare them on their butt a little bit, right? And get them to react. And that might be what you need to do, but then serve them up the hope of, don't worry, we've got this. Like, we can build a plan together. And you should be scared if you're not planning for this. But lucky you, I'm here to help you get through this scary time. So I think it's about, certainly we want to use futures to provide inspiration. But if we need to use a little bit of the fear to get them to pay attention, I think that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think as Foresight practitioners, we're chameleons. I hadn't really thought of one aspect of that as savior, but thank you for that, Jen. Melanie, what would you add to that?
The first thing that comes to mind is fear is a huge driver of people to foresight. It's a very common reason that senior leaders or C-suite leaders find foresight. And that moment is not the time to wax poetic about what we all believe about foresight. Those are leaders who are scared and they want an answer in the moment about this thing that they read about in a headline of the Wall Street Journal, or something that they heard about from a golf buddy, and they want to know the answer to that one question right away. In my experience, answering that question, creating some relief, and then once that answer has been provided, going into, hey, there are a bunch of other questions that you may not be thinking about. Let's talk about how we can use foresight more regularly in your business practice. That tends to work better, but that moment of fear is sort of a dire call for an answer that they really want before anything else.
Well, let's bring it back to the positivity. After all, the title of the panel is Winning with Foresight. So if we're in that winning space, how do we know when we're winning with Foresight?
Yeah.
Caroline.
It's not an easy one, I would say, because it's not like I would say a match for, it doesn't have a beginning and an end, I would say. So if I come back to this travel retail, for example, a piece of work that we did, this one I think we can say that we have won, because we are in the process of winning, I would say. Because for me, it's when people are really embracing this vision and participating to this vision and transform this vision into, again, bunches of action and planning and projects. I think this is really the win. And I can say that for this piece of work, it has been presented to a lot of people in the organization, and they are now taking that and presenting that to the industry. So I think it's really moving people internally, but also externally. And I think this is very strong. But it's the first one. We need to do many others like that. Yeah.
So cultural adoption, because I think, and some of the other panels have addressed this too, measuring effectiveness in foresight, and I mean, that feels like such an elusive concept. Jen, Melanie, have either of you seen other ways to measure whether the foresight's on track or it's delivering what it needs to deliver?
So measurement does continue to be a challenge. We'll do, some of the things that we do is there's always check-ins with teams, right? If we've interacted with a team, did we help you feel more confident about the decisions? Did you take these forward? Then we'll come back to them 3 months later, 6 months later, and check in again. Are you still using it? Is it time to take another look at your plan and see if it's still on track? So I think that's one of the ways. Repeat customers are always welcome, right? And at the end of the day, though, what we're really trying to do is help leaders feel more confident about the decisions that they're having to make now for the future. And so if we're providing them that confidence, then it feels like a win.
I love that. I think we should bring out loyalty programs for other departments across companies. Melanie, what would you say?
There are qualitative ways and there are quantitative ways to measure the success of foresight. I would love to see more corporations measuring their productivity, their profitability, their growth from the time that they implement foresight as it matures in the organization. And there are studies, Rohrbeck is a very popular study, there are ways to measure this. But qualitatively, even if you can't implement a primary study, is foresight being used in your annual strategic planning process? And in that process, are you mapping from short-term strategic action to that long-term vision and back again to make sure that they're connected? That's one qualitative way to see whether or not foresight is having an impact in the organization. The other is, I think, easier to manage, which is, are your leaders being surprised? If your leaders are being blindsided often, if you're still getting those fire drills because your leader heard about something and needs it investigated, that's a good indicator that foresight isn't having the intended effect inside the organization.
That's fair. You talked about short-term to long-term, and one thing we haven't alighted on at all yet is timeframes. Do you find there's an effective window for foresight? Obviously, it can be so expansive, and a lot of what we've listened to over the last 2 days absolutely has been. But inside the reality, if we come back to that sort of practical utopia piece that Patrick opened the conference with, what is a time frame that works when it comes to delivering foresight in the private sector? Jen?
Great question. And the truth is, right, it's going to be different for each team. Yeah. If I have a team that's coming to me looking to build out a software product, for example, we'd probably be working on a shorter time frame with them than we might a team that's building an all-new vehicle. I think, and even within that, there's always space for these larger, bigger visions. So we work anywhere from a 2-year to a 10-year time frame, quite frankly, depending upon the team and the need. So I don't know if there's just one single spot.
I think we're amongst plural friends here. So I think that open-ended is perfectly acceptable. Caroline, I think you work in a fast-moving consumer goods space. Is that the antithesis of foresight? How do you do it?
Actually, it reminded me a discussion I had with one of the VP of L'Oréal, because I wanted to do, to talk about 2040, but actually quite laughed at me, say 2040, but the world will be so different in 2040. So I said, okay, so we should stick to 10 years. I think 8 to 10 years is really good, because I would say it's it depends also on the turn of, I would say, the timing of innovation. We have, of course, if I were to build nuclear plants, it would have been 50 years time, but now we are doing beauty products, and sometimes there are some super complicated to do, so it requires quite a time to craft the innovation. So I say that twice the pace of innovation timing, it's a good one. So from 8 to 10 years, I think it's for my organization, I think it's good, because it gives a way to project ourselves. But also, and of course, it's not once we do a foresight and we, I would say, refresh that very regularly to say, okay, this is the everlasting and this is the ever-changing, So this is how we do. But 8 to 10 years for big foresight. But I have also a lot of conversations with brands, and the brands, their time frame is much shorter. So for them, it's 3 to 5 years maximum. But now I need to bring more foresight in my brand's coaching, which will be my roadmap for next year.
I think Horizons 1 and 2 seem to be the sweet spot. Horizon 3 is there, and I think we can provoke with that, but the day-to-day doesn't necessarily...
But Horizon 3 is also for sustainability and big, longer term. So from time to time we can be asked for that, but it's not the regular things I'm doing.
Well, I'm conscious of time, and I guess we've had so many expansive thoughts over the course of the 2 days. I thought we might bring it back to the near future. And I wanted to ask each of you before we part with our audience, what's the signal or the provocation or the foresight that you want to take into 2025? Something you've seen from the event, or just something you're preoccupied with in terms of a must-do, I will be in foresight next year. Jen?
Well, I'll just go with one of my kind of personal interests. Something I've found particularly fascinating is really this declining birth rate problem that we are having in so many of the Western countries in particular, not just those, but I think that in itself is interesting, but what I think is even more interesting is the reaction, right? What are we seeing governments do about it? How are we seeing women use it as an empowerment movement, for example? So I think that conversation is going to continue to grow as we see kind of pushes on both sides to hold control of that and to help nudge people to have more babies. So I'm curious to continue to see how that's going to play out.
No doubt. Melanie?
The bottom line is for leaders to open their minds to new sources for the workforce. I'm seeing a lot of signals in education. And education is a space that particularly private sector often doesn't think it needs to pay attention to, feels a little squishy. Education, though, is going through a real transformation. I heard a speaker earlier today, one of the UN Foresight Fellows, referred to classrooms in Ghana overflowing. Meanwhile, China is investing heavily in Africa and South America while US pulls out that investment, and that's giving China access to a broader skilled workforce. Meanwhile, homeschooling has increased, I think, from 2.4 million to 4 million from 2019 to 2024 in the US. And so we're seeing this huge investment in education in a lot of developing regions of our world. Meanwhile, we're seeing Western parts of our world shift significantly in investment in education, and meanwhile, complain about a lack of a skilled workforce. So I would encourage leaders to keep their eye on new sources of skilled labor, new sources of information and intelligence from maybe regions of the world that they had not paid attention to before.
Thank you. I think we've been inspired a lot around education and constant skill acquisition over the last couple of days. Caroline, your signal for 2025.
Yeah, so I think I would bring a little bit of lightness. Maybe it's not very new, but I find this wish to come together, to dance together, to play together, to do things together. I would call that the dopamine effect, the fact that, this golden ticket to a better world together. And we see that, of course, in beauty, and beauty plays a big role in that. But I think that this dopamine effect will invade, hospitality, gaming, fashion, etc. Because actually we want to we want to live our full life. You know, my son is a DG, so he's a DG in Madrid, and actually he told me that, you know, he has been there for the last 4 years, and you see that year after year, see this crave for partying has been increasingly growing. So I don't know whether it's good for a parent to have a son that is a DG, but still, he's having a lot of fun, and I think we all should have a lot of fun also in our lives. I believe very much into this dopamine effect, and I think that all brands should play a big role in that, you know, bringing all the joy.
I'll happily sign up for more permission to party as a Foresight practitioner or a futurist or whatever. But the point about social connectedness is so strong, and in the end, it's why we're all here. And thank you all for being here with us in this penultimate plenary session.